Good afternoon. My name is Michael Morris, and I'm the Executive Director of the National Disability Institute. I'm pleased to welcome you today to the first in a three-part series celebrating the 25th anniversary of the Americans with Disabilities Act. Some of you were very much aware and around in 1990 when President H.W. Bush signed into law the ADA. The ADA had strong bipartisan support, and it represented a major shift in public policy that recognized the importance of the protection of civil rights for individuals with disabilities and an end to discrimination against people with disabilities in the workplace, all types of public accommodations, and all federally funded and supported programs and services. But for so many of us, the ADA was more than just reducing barriers to community living, working, and advancing economic self-sufficiency. The ADA was also about changing public attitudes, perceptions, and behaviors that individuals with disabilities have much to contribute to the vitality and quality of community life across this country. I'm pleased that this is the first of a three-part series. Today, the session is titled The Olmstead Supreme Court Decision, the Community Integration Imperative. Before we begin and I introduce our panelists, I do want to thank our partner in bringing this speaker series to you, ServiceSource. I've had the pleasure of working in partnership with ServiceSource for a number of years, and we've had terrific collaborations that have resulted in improving access to integrated competitive employment for people with disabilities. We come here today from ServiceSource's newly opened National Capital Area Disability Resource Center in Oakton, Virginia. This center is a result of ServiceSource and a group of committed partners, quickly becoming what was envisioned a total community resource in which people with and without disabilities can access services such as assistive technology, veteran services, family support, legal assistance, financial capability counseling, health and wellness, career exploration, self-employment, and much more. Let me share with you today a little bit of the background of our three extraordinary panelists who you are going to hear from in a few minutes. The first panelist you will hear from is Allison Barkoff. She is Director of Advocacy at the Bazelon Center for Mental Health Law. At the center, she works on policy and litigation related to community integration and inclusion of people with disabilities, including Olmstead, Medicaid, employment, housing, and education. From 2010 to 2014, she served as special counsel for Olmstead enforcement in the Civil Rights Division of the Department of Justice. In that position, she led the division's efforts to enforce the rights of individuals with disabilities to live, work, and receive services in the community. Under her leadership, the division issued its first Olmstead guidance and was actively involved in Olmstead litigation across the country, including numerous cases culminating in statewide system reform settlement agreements. During her time with the federal government, Ms. Barkoff also worked with CMS, the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, on finalizing rules governing Medicaid-funded community-based services, and with the Department of Labor on implementation of its new home care rule in Medicaid-funded disability service systems. Prior to her time with government, she worked at the Bazelon Center and at other public interest organizations on Olmstead enforcement, disability discrimination, Medicaid, employment, and special education cases. She also served as a judicial clerk for then Second Circuit Judge Sonia Sotomayor and for Southern District of New York Judge William Pauley. She is a graduate of Cornell University and Emory University School of Law, one of the things we have in common, as I am a graduate of Emory University School of Law as well. Our second panelist is Serena Lowe. Serena is the Senior Policy Advisor at the U.S. Department of Labor's Office of Disability Employment Policy, or many of you are probably more aware of it by its acronym, ODEP. Serena, at ODEP, within the U.S. Department of Labor, works on many, many key issues that relate to Olmstead and Olmstead implementation. She's responsible for a number of federal policy initiatives focused on promoting the socioeconomic advancement of citizens with disabilities, including the department's Employment First State Leadership Mentoring Program. Through this initiative, ODEP provides access to mentoring and in-depth training and technical assistance to support states' efforts in aligning public policy and funding towards an emphasis on integrated employment as the preferred outcome for citizens with significant disabilities. Prior to joining ODEP, for the past 15 years, Serena worked in both government and the private sector as a consultant with some over 35 national corporate and not-for-profit entities in the area of public policy, advocacy, coalition building, strategic and commercial planning, and organizational development. Earlier in her career, Serena served as a senior policy advisor for a pharmaceutical company and 2 members of the U.S. House of Representatives. Serena has a master's in public health degree and a master's of arts in international development studies. And it's hard to believe, but yes, she finally has completed that PhD in public administration she's worked so hard on for the last several years from American University just last year in 2014. Our third panelist is Jonathan Martinez. Jonathan is the legal director for the Quality Trust for Individuals with Disabilities here in Washington, D.C. Jonathan has over 20 years of experience representing people with disabilities in cases under federal and state civil rights laws, including the first case to hold that people with disabilities have a right to paratransit transportation on a next-day basis, and in a more interesting case requiring the Virginia Lottery to ensure that private businesses sell lottery tickets that are accessible to people with disabilities. In 2013, in a case that has reverberated across this country and internationally as well, Jonathan represented Jenny Hatch here in the state of Virginia in the Justice for Jenny case, the first to hold that a person with disabilities has the right to live in the community and make her own decisions using supported decision-making instead of being under the more restrictive requirements of guardianship. As project director today of the National Resource Center for Supported Decision-Making, funded by the Administration on Community Living at the Department of Health and Human Services, Jonathan is the leading spokesperson on issues around supported decision-making nationwide, speaks frequently at conferences, and has been published in multiple national journals on this increasingly important contemporary issue. You're going to hear from each of our panelists. Each brings with them clearly, as you've listened to their backgrounds, an enormous wealth of information, expertise, experience about the world we lived in back in 1990, before the passage of the ADA, and what's happened since during these 25 years. One of our panelists is still with the federal government and works for the U.S. Department of Labor. Another of our panelists, Allison, spent very, very important years and really was a pioneer in representing what would Olmstead mean to more and more people in this country. And then, of course, Jonathan Martinez in the private sector is paving the way for the most contemporary issue of all, for all of us thinking about people with disabilities, is who is to have choice? Who is to make decisions? And how does that interplay with Olmstead? So enough with my introductions. I do want to thank all of you here today, hearing us live in this room at the Resource Center here in Oakton, Virginia. But I know also hundreds of you are joining via web stream across the country. I hope you'll be able to stay with us to both hear the presentations, which will be followed by a dialogue. There will be an opportunity to take questions both from people in the room and from people across the country who can introduce their questions, sending them in online. We'll take as many as are possible, and we do hope in this way it's not just us talking to you, but also engage in a dialogue as we look at Olmsted today, ADA today, almost at age 25, and think about what does the future hold for us, for communities, for individuals with disabilities and families. I do want to ask before we start the first presentation that if you have a cell phone, that you make sure that you have turned it off, and so that we minimize any disruptions. So I'm going to turn the floor over first to Allison, who really brings an extraordinary background, as I've mentioned, not only in terms of her work at Justice, but her work today at Baselen. But I hope she'll tell us a little bit about, she was in Georgia, which is where the Olmsted case emanated from. And she had a bit to do with that as well. Allison, take it away.
Thank you. Thank you, Michael, for that introduction. Let's see. Oh, there we are. Okay. Thank you, everybody. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here and to help celebrate with all of you. On the 25th anniversary of Olmsted, I think Michael really mentioned one of the quotes that kind of resonates most with me on this anniversary. We're all talking about disability rights are civil rights. And I approach this world in many ways. First, I am a civil rights lawyer, and Michael kind of laid out my background, and I've been passionately fighting my entire career for full inclusion of people with disabilities. But more importantly, I approach this, and I'm really reflective at this moment, as a sibling. A brother who is really living the kind of life that's embodied by the ADA, but in the trajectory of one young man's life, he's 38 right now, I've really seen the way our society has approached people with disabilities, the opportunities for people with disabilities really transform. And so what I'm going to do today is give a little bit of historical context. As I look across the room, I still think of myself as 20-something, but since I vividly remember when the ADA was passed, I'm not. But some people in this room might not remember the world that existed. And so I want to put a little bit of historical context on where we were, why the ADA was so important, and really how Olmsted helped breathe life into the ADA. So I want to start with what my approach to everything about people with disabilities is about. It's about how do we value and fully include people with disabilities. And so the opposite side of inclusion is segregation. And that's really what Olmsted and Title II of the ADA is about addressing. And why is it? Why is it that segregation is so harmful? It's one of the few things, and Michael mentioned I clerked for Justice Sotomayor. This is no dig on the Supreme Court, but sometimes they don't kind of always encapsulate the human aspect, although a few decisions this term, they did a nice job. But in the Olmsted decision, they really captured why segregation is so harmful to people with disabilities. And it's because it perpetuates ways that we view people with disabilities that are so wrong. Separating people with disabilities says you're incapable, you're unworthy of being part of our communities. The other harm to people with disabilities is it deprives them of the very things we take for granted in our everyday life. Being part of a family, going to work, the opportunity to go to school, or to have friends and social contacts. And that's really the frame of my comments today, is about how do we address segregation and create opportunities for full inclusion. So as many of you know, and I'm looking around the room, fortunately, many of you weren't around when this was the norm, but certainly at the time my brother was born in the late 1970s, the norm was to institutionalize and segregate people with significant disabilities. And it's kind of shocking when we look, any of us who have kids, I know my kids are in a classroom with other kids with disabilities. It's so a normal part of our human experience. But it wasn't until the mid-70s that children with disabilities even had a right to attend public school. And for any kids who even got an education at that time, it was typically in segregated schools only for people with disabilities. And now, you know, there's so much nothing about us without us, the motto of the disability rights movement. But again, in the time my brother was born, the people with disabilities were not empowered in any way to make decisions about their own lives. And we're going to hear a lot about how that's changed from Jonathan. So how did we get here? We had this incredible disability rights movement that saw other civil rights movement and the progress that they were making. And really, that is why I think it's so critical to see our disability movement as part of the broader civil rights movement. And so it grew out of the independent living movement. It grew out of families who were demanding something different for their family members. And so people began pushing for more control over their own lives, more access to the broader community. Families were saying, we want to keep our kids at home. Don't spend all this money on institutionalizing them and ripping them away from their natural supports. We need to find ways to help keep kids with disabilities at home. And as many of you know, and maybe far too many of us are forgetting, there was such incredible abuse and neglect and warehousing of people with disabilities in institutions that the disability rights movement said, we have got to get people out of these places where people are rotting, where people are losing skills. It wasn't about recovery. It wasn't about growth. It was really appalling conditions. So it became clear that we need a civil rights law to help us achieve these goals. I think an important piece of the civil rights movement and the early disability rights movement, I'm still so astounded. I hope many of you kind of look online. There's so many interviews of the early leaders in the disability rights movement. And I think they set out a vision for people with disabilities that really resonates today. And I think it's still what drives our movement today. And it's pretty simple. Full inclusion in all aspects of life. Everything from being part of the broader community, to school, to work. It's about high expectations. I just spent 2 days sitting on a committee of people looking at employment of people with disabilities, and I'm sure we're going to hear about that from Serena. And again and again and again, we heard it's low expectations that keep people down, whether it's by people with disabilities themselves, because they're told again and again and again, you can't, you can't, you can't. Or whether it's by family members who aren't really able to go out and see what the real possibilities are. Whether it's teachers, whether it's providers, we have got to have high expectations. I know in my family, when there was no rival image out there for my mom to look at and say, this is what we want for Evan, she said, okay, this is my goals for my daughter. This is my goal for my sons too. So it's all about saying what's important to people, and that's the expectations for people with disabilities. And finally, again, we're going to hear more about self-determination, people making choices for themselves, the dignity of risk. People make choices, and some of the most wonderful things in life come along with risks for all of us, and choice that's driven by what's important to people and what their preferences are. So we didn't have a lot before the ADA, frankly. We kind of first had the U.S. Constitution as a tool for early institutional reform. It's what at least got us to be able to address some of the horrible conditions at institutions like Willowbrook. The Constitution is not a very high standard in this area, and just the abuse and neglect that was happening to people who were in state custody at least got us a way to focus on improving conditions, just a basic right to safety and adequate treatment. But it didn't get us what we needed, which is a way to build the community system. So there was a huge push, and the disability rights movement fought so hard for the Rehab Act of 1973. And as many of you might know, there was like incredible sit-ins that happened to get out strong regulations. People thought this was the promise. What it does is it prohibits discrimination by recipients of federal money, and it was the predecessor to the ADA. It's incredibly important. But it had limits. It was limited to people who got federal money. And so while it had a very important impact on many issues, public transportation, accessibility of public buildings, it didn't actually change integration as much as many of us had hoped. And as I mentioned, personally, as someone who spends so much of my time focusing on inclusive education, because it starts, frankly, I think we should all be thinking in preschool about inclusive education and the dreams we have for our preschoolers with disabilities. But opening up the schoolhouses to students with disabilities was incredible. It created an opportunity for families to keep their kids at home and in the community. And if you look at kind of the number of people entering institutions, there's a direct correlation with our opening schoolhouses. And again, it gives kids an opportunity to be around the rest of society, and it's incredibly important. So with that backdrop, you know, we had this framework, we had this movement, we had kind of these precursor laws, but we didn't have kind of our gold standard, our civil rights law. So here comes the ADA, and again, we're going to be hearing so much over the next several weeks of the pioneers who really fought for this. But what was incredible in the ADA is the intent was to provide a clear and comprehensive national mandate for the elimination of discrimination against people with disabilities. And if you look at the findings, it's incredible the breadth that the ADA covers. And I want to really talk about how it addresses segregation. It specifically found that segregation, isolation, exclusion, and institutionalization was a serious and pervasive problem in 1990 and frankly still today. And the goal of the ADA is to assure equality of opportunity, full participation, independent living, and economic self-sufficiency. So broad. And where I spend most of my time in looking at state systems, looking at public disability systems, is at Title II of the ADA. And as Michael mentioned, it prohibits discrimination by public entities in all services, programs, and activities. And it requires that these services, programs, and activities be administered in the most integrated setting appropriate. And in one of the few, being involved in writing regs, I'll take this dig myself, in one of the few common sense definitions, if we probably went around the room and said, what does integration mean? I think they really captured it. It's the ability to interact with people without disabilities to the fullest extent possible. So we have this great law in 1990, the ADA gets passed, and frankly, you know, people kind of said, what does discrimination mean? When you're looking at a civil rights context in a traditional civil rights paradigm where you say, okay, here's a protected class, here's people outside of the class, it's about, are you treating people in the protected class differently? Well, the ADA is actually a little different than traditional civil rights law. It's about how do we level the playing field? In fact, it requires people with disabilities sometimes to be treated differently. That's what reasonable accommodations are all about. Sometimes we have to do something different to get people with disabilities in the front door. So while it may be hard to wrap our mind around it now, what the Olmstead case brought to the Supreme Court was really that question of, is unnecessary segregation of people with disabilities actually disability discrimination when it's something that only people with disabilities experience? So the facts of that case, hopefully many of you know by now, it's two women in my good state of Georgia, where my brother is in the system. He is, living this incredible life on the DD Council, but, not the days in 1999 where 2 women were institutionalized in Georgia's state psychiatric institutions. Both of them had intellectual disabilities and mental health disabilities. And they brought a lawsuit against Georgia claiming that the state was violating Title II of the ADA by not providing them services in the community instead of in an institution. The hospital said, you could live in the community. You don't need to be here. And the state said, sorry, we don't have anything for you. And as I mentioned, when the Supreme Court found that unjustified segregation is itself discrimination, they talked about why that segregation is so harmful to people with disabilities. And again, it's about unwarranted stereotypes that we have and depriving people with disabilities of the opportunities we take for granted. And so the Supreme Court said that community-based services are required. States are required to provide them whenever such services are appropriate, when people don't oppose community placement, and when you look at the whole disability system, when community-based treatment can be reasonably accommodated. So I just want to briefly touch on kind of very high level, post-Olmstead, we've been involved in fleshing out, what does this mean? We've gone from a paradigm where, traditional state psychiatric and hospitals and DD institutions to private institutions, to things in the, quote, community that look very much like institutions. We have wait lists. We have people at risk of going into institutions. And so one important expansion of since the Olmstead decision is it's not only about people in state-run institutions. It applies whenever the government operates programs or finances programs or promotes programs that segregate people with disabilities. And again, this was originally about someone who was in an institution, but what about all the people who are sitting there on wait lists, who are literally knocking on the door of institutions, whether it's a psychiatric facility or a DD institution or a nursing home? Do they actually have to relinquish their rights in the community to have a right under Olmstead? And the answer is no. People at serious risk are also covered by Olmstead. And that includes people on wait lists with significant needs, people who are subject to cuts in community services, or people who are in a pipeline, sometimes we've seen with students, into segregated day programs, for example. So segregated settings are ones that have institutional qualities. And I think it's a paradigm we really need to look closely at many things in our community system. So when we're looking at congregate settings where people with disabilities are primarily with people with disabilities and paid staff, or where they're regimented in activities and they don't have privacy or autonomy or the ability to go out into the community. And we've really pushed, and it's not just about where people live, it's also about how people spend their days. So when people spend their days only with other people with disabilities, that is a segregated setting. On the other hand, what is an integrated setting? And I think it's what we all want. It's what we're all talking about. It's really pretty simple. And I say, it's really about giving people the opportunity to live their life like people without disabilities. So to live, work, and receive services in the greater community. So services and programs in the mainstream society where you can access community activities at the time and place of your choosing. You get to choose how you spend your days and interact with people without disabilities to the fullest extent possible. So why do we still need Olmstead enforcement? Despite progress, there are too many people who remain unnecessarily segregated and many other who remain at risk. And I'd encourage you to look at some of the work that I helped lead at the Department of Justice that's happening in the private, not-for-profit sector, because there's still a lot of work for us to do. But Olmstead really is a tool to address these problems. And I'm really proud to be here in Virginia, where I was involved in a system reform and implementing a settlement agreement that we're in the middle of in Virginia and changing the intellectual and developmental disabilities system. And just some ways we use Olmstead as a tool is about creating these settlement agreements, creating kind of models for states that increase the capacity of community services that are critical for successful community tenure. It's about housing, it's about jobs, it's about access to clinical services, it's about access to medical services, it's about access to waivers. Housing is so important, and I just want to emphasize affordable, permanent, integrated community housing is so key and something we need to keep working on. And we need to make sure people are given a meaningful choice to be in the most integrated setting possible. That means people really need to be engaged. If people have been segregated and have been told you can't for their whole lives, we really need to give them experiential opportunities to go out and say, what does it look like? What is this community program like? To talk to peers, to talk to providers. And we need to presume that people are capable. That's the baseline we need to start from. There's been a whole range of Olmstead activities, challenges around a whole wide range of settings across disability populations on behalf of people segregated or at risk of being segregated. And I just want to, end with touching on a couple major themes from Olmstead activities. It's not just about moving people out of segregated settings. It has got to be about creating quality community alternatives. It's about what we want. It's not just about taking down what we know is outdated. It's not just about where people live. It is just as important how people spend their days. And it's about not just services, but we have got to focus on integrated housing because lack of affordable housing is one of the biggest barriers. We know how to leverage Medicaid on the service side, but we are still working on how do we leverage federal housing programs that are critical to Olmstead. We know it's about both rebalancing money that we have in our system from services that are outdated and moving them towards what we want, and having stakeholders like you involved and coming together is incredibly important. So just briefly, future of Olmstead, I think we're going to continue to see a lot of the work that we're doing, but because now we really are focused on employment and work, we're going to start seeing more challenges and changes around day service systems. We're going to be looking more at segregation of students and the ADA as a tool and how that kind of intersects with special education laws. I think we're going to be looking at intersections with criminal justice. All these things on this list are things that I'm doing. And really kind of criminalization of people with disabilities. Aging advocates, it's an incredible tool that's been underutilized. And I think we really need to look at how Olmstead intersects with other civil rights and disability laws. With that, I am going to turn it over to Serena.
Thank you so much. It's hard to go after Allison Barkoff. I'm really proud and privileged to be here. I want to thank Janet Samuelson and the Service Source team, and also Michael Morris and National Disability Institute for creating this dialogue. And I want to welcome everyone both here at Service Source, but also that are joining us virtually for what I think is a really rigorous dialogue. And I always love July because it is a time for celebration and a reflection of how far we've come in this work. But I always say that just like Christmas, I wish July was every month and that we constantly remind ourselves and create opportunities for a more rigorous dialogue about what we can do more, what we can do better, how are we going to push ourselves forward as a community. I always learned so much listening to Allison, and I just had to share something about inclusion. I was in diapers in the 70s and grew up in the 70s and 80s, and inclusion was interesting because as a kid, we knew how to do it. We thought the adults in our lives were a little silly about the parameters and limitations that they put on people. I had friends, Albert, who had spina bifida and very significant physical disabilities as a result of that, and Leslie, who had significant intellectual disabilities. And, you know, when we would get together to play with them, we would want to go out as kids do and go run around. And they would say, well, Albert can't do that with you because of his disabilities. Or we'd want to go to the movies, and Leslie can't come with you. She can't sit still that long. And, you know, one day we kind of got fed up one summer day. I remember this clearly. We had a barbecue, and a bunch of us kids were out in the cul-de-sac, and we wanted to ride bikes. And it was the same kind of, Leslie can't ride a bike. She doesn't understand how. Albert can't ride a bike because of his disabilities. So we went outside, and within about 20 minutes, we had it figured out. First off, Leslie absolutely could ride a bike. She just needed someone to show her, and two of us showed her. And she's riding the bike, and the only thing that we had to be careful of is to tell her, hey, you can't just keep going. You got to come back. And so once she figured that out, she was fine. And with Albert, we just hitched up one of those old red wagons next to a bike, tied it with a jump rope, and he was riding with us. It's amazing what we can learn from kids, you know, and what we can learn about inclusion from the next generation. Anyway, I have a wonderful privilege of working on what I think is a really creative and innovative systems change model called Employment First. And Employment First is coming at a really exciting time where Olmsted and the implications of Olmsted really is where the rubber hits the road for us at a very systems level. Olmsted said definitively that individuals with disabilities should not be segregated in non-residential employment and vocational programs. It was the first time that the ADA was really applied to employment, this idea of employment. Now, why is employment important? Because when we're going to school, as we're growing up, when we become adults, what's the number one thing we talk about? Where do you work? What do you do for a living? What's your passions? And it's usually part of our job is our passions. Employment is the anchor of community engagement and involvement. And it's not the end-all be-all of engagement, but it's the start, it's the epicenter. It's how we make friends and contacts, we learn, we grow as part of being part of our economic mainstream and our general workforce. And what Olmsted, the real implications of Olmsted is that they said the civil rights of people with disabilities extends into employment services in the community, and that publicly financed supports need to do everything they can to exhaust options for community-based employment services. So with that context, we're now in 2012, 3 years ago. And the Department of Justice joined a class action suit against the state of Oregon, and found in its summary of findings that the state of Oregon failed to provide employment and vocational services to citizens with intellectual and developmental disabilities in the most integrated setting appropriate to their needs for three key reasons. The first reason is because they found that the state had not developed a sufficient number of providers of home and community-based services and employment supports to be provided in the community, and had not invested in building that capacity. Second, they looked at the finances, how the state was spending its money, where was the focus and the priority of its funding and resources, and found that too often the state was directing available resources to segregated sheltered workshops rather than community-based employment services. So there was a real disincentive for providers who might want to expand or diversify their employment supports. And then third, and I think extremely important, there was a systemic criteria that even for individuals who said, we want to learn how to work in the community. We want an internship like our friends in the community. We want a summer job in the community. There was still this systemic process that required them to go into a facility-based center first to acquire pre-vocational services. And that is still a pending case, but the reason I put those 3 points on there is because I get to work with states, and the first conversation we have, I say to states, do you meet those 3 criteria? And if you don't, and you're really serious about getting ahead of the curve, then it's time for us to partner. And that's what's really exciting about this. There's been other legal enforcement developments related to the use of 14C certificates and sub-minimum wages. Again, use legal measures related to the provision of services, again, in segregated systems where even youth in transition years are being pipelined into segregated services. And so those developments have also helped reinforce a need for states to think methodically and comprehensively about how are we going to approach this differently. And that's where Employment First comes in. I think it's an exciting time. Employment First has been around for 13 years. But I would say that it's barely been in the last 5 or 6 years that's really taken off in a strategic way. And we look at it as the pathway to transformation in fully including people with disabilities in their communities. Employment First, just for those that may not be familiar with the concept, it's a concept that employment should be the first priority outcome of day and employment services provided by public entities with people with disabilities. And so we don't spend a lot of time thinking about if someone can work or thinking about all the eligibility requirements, that all the checking of the boxes to establish that we tried to think about work, but we didn't. No, we think about it from this person can work. They have contributions to make to our society. Now, how are we going to help them attain a job? And that's a different conversation than what we've been having for many decades in our public service systems. It's exciting to note that over 34 states now have an Employment First initiative of some sort, and there's 20 states now with official policies. And that's pretty exciting. I would say even if they're not calling it Employment First, there's a lot of exciting work going on the ground in state government and also in localities throughout the country. It's not easy, though. It's complicated work because we've got this wonderful civil rights framework, but now the devil's in the details in terms of how to implement it with fidelity. And so that means that we have to go back to social service programs that have been around for 50, 60, 70, 80 years, models, ways of doing things that we're really entrenched in as systems, as government. We're putting millions of dollars into certain ways. We're telling providers of services, we want you to get as many people in this group setting and under this group service as possible, and we're going to pay you a certain amount of premium to do that. And now we're asking everybody to kind of turn around, do a cartwheel and stand on your hands for a while and think about things completely different. And that is scary. That's scary for individuals who are sometimes clients of a system and other times victims of a system because they're being pulled in different directions, and that uncertainty of the unknown is very scary. It's scary for families who are supportive of individuals with disabilities but want to make sure that they are protected from the harms of the unknown. And it's difficult for providers and frontline service professionals who work day in and day out to serve and support people with disabilities. So knowing that, we kind of have to talk about this as a web or a puzzle, so to speak. And I always say there's kind of 5 different ways that states can look at things. First, through our legal enforcement, and we talked about that today. That's why we're here. That gives us our framework for moving forward. But we also have to talk about where's the funding going? How are we spending our public dollars? What incentives are we providing, not only to providers, but individuals with disabilities and their families for going into a different direction? And what kind of long-term supports come with that? And then what type of regulations are we putting in place to really help society, systems, communities as a whole figure this out? I would say that one thing that we have to do is have a conversation about money, because funding matters. And I think all of us that are in whatever role that we play working with and for people with disabilities, we have to be honest with ourselves that money matters. and it drives practice. And it's been driving certain practices for a really long time. Billions of dollars going in to segregated settings and facilities where the government is sending a loud and clear message that this is the way we want you to serve people with disabilities. And as Allison is pointing out, that has to stop. We have to change that tide. So in doing that, we have to think about incentives. And there's all kinds of incentives across the federal government right now that's being pushed down into the state level, into local communities to help provide technical resources and supports and funding to help various entities figure out this complex work and bring the ideals of employment first into a real life scenario that becomes a typical, normal process for all individuals going through receiving services for how they spend their day, and not just the exception. In terms of regulations, whoever said that government can't do anything? Federal policy has been, it's been an exciting time to be in federal policy. There's been a number of developments just over the past year and a half in terms of completely revitalizing our workforce investment system, our vocational rehabilitation system, sending strong messages to the field about education and transition supports. And that transition supports under IDEA also have least restricted environment attached to them. That means when you're providing transition supports, they should be out in the community, just as if you were providing transition supports to a youth or individual or a student without a disability. And then long-term supports and services is going through a major makeover and really looking at how do we serve people in the most integrated setting possible. And with this all kind of creates the perfect storm. And what I mean by that is that, we're out on a ship and the tides start to rise, and we can either push through the storm and look at this as an opportunity to see what's on the other side, or we can drown. But the storm is here, and we have a lot of work to do to really implement these various things with fidelity. So just to tell you a little bit about our Employment First State Leadership Mentoring Program, we are working with a number of states throughout the country across systems to really help ask some tough questions related to their systems reform efforts. How do we align policy, practice, and funding? How do we build and sustain the capacity of our frontline workforce to provide employment supports in a meaningful way and help individuals with disabilities succeed in employment? What expectations should we be placing on providers, and what supports do they need to help change their own business models? And then how do we measure progress over time? How do we make sure that what we're doing makes sense? Again, as I've said, we have some unique features. We're the only federal Employment First systems change initiative thus far that requires a minimum of 6 state agencies to be at the table: education, Medicaid, vocational rehabilitation, workforce investment, intellectual and developmental disability, adult services, and mental health. That in and of itself is a feat, because you'd be surprised. We only have so many hours in the day, all of us, and you'd be surprised how siloed these systems are, and they're not always talking to each other. So it's the first thing we do is bring them together to talk to each other. We also are focused on a number of other, kind of a 3-legged stool, if you will. We're trying to build practice. We're trying to build capacity among the workforce and among the provider network, but it comes with a caveat. We expect states to align their policies and their funding priorities to meet the guiding principles of the ADA and the direction of Olmstead. And if they aren't doing that, we can throw all the money in the world into providers and into workforce, to the direct support workforce. But it won't do any good if the message that's being sent is, we want you to keep paying for segregation. And so we approach this in a number of ways, and we work with states on their provider transformation, school-to-work transition, employer engagement activities. We haven't talked a lot about employers, but employers want to be meaningful partners in this. They want to be a part of the solution, and we have to figure out innovative ways to bring them in meaningful, strategic conversations, and then building the capacity of the workforce. So just to end, just to wrap up, I want to say a couple of things about what states are doing to realign that funding focus, to really align policies to where they really do speak in unison with the ideals of the ADA and the Olmstead decision. Number one, policies that support employment first. First off, you've got to have all agency partners at the table, and they all have to be recognizing their obligations under the ADA and Olmstead. They have to commit to delivering employment and day services in the most integrated settings, and that be the priority of all of their policies, of their practices, and of their funding, where they're investing. And they've got to commit to specific goals for systematically reducing the reliance on sheltered work and other segregated day settings. They've also got to present, first and foremost, integrated employment, or even what I would say competitive integrated employment. People having real jobs at real wages in real community settings. That's the goal. We have a lot of discussion about definition at the federal level. And I sometimes I come home and my 11-year-old again brings me back to earth and says, a job is a job. I know what a job is. It's not volunteering. I get money. Like I go out and I work and I get money. And I work with other people in a community, providing a service or helping with a product. If she can get it, we can get it. And I think we've got to have that conversation at the state level. We've got to be encouraging integrated employment and not discussing other options before employment is explored and has been tried. And we have to ensure that education about integrated employment includes opportunities to learn about the benefits of integrated employment so that people with disabilities see workers with disabilities who are already in competitive integrated employment, and their families get a chance to interact with families who have been supporting individuals with disabilities in community-based integrated employment. We also have to presume employability with the right job match and supports. So it's not, we spend a lot of money and time talking about whether someone can be employed, instead of just from the get-go saying they absolutely can, we have to figure out the way to do it. Allison talked about creativity. I remind you again of the bike. If we're all wed to the idea that the person can do something, then we take all that time and that we would have talked about whether they are, and we reinvest it in helping them accomplish the goal. We don't spend a lot of time on vocational testing or assessments, and we invest in upfront services that are focused on determining how an individual can be successful. This is a slide that just talks to you a little bit about aligned services and capacity building goals. But one of the toughest challenges for state systems is figuring out how to work together. They all want to see better in outcomes and more engagement of individuals with disabilities in their communities, but they don't always know how to work with their various systems in thinking through, well, I can do this service and another system can do another service. And there's all kinds of creative things going on in the field right now. And I would just encourage state and local governments to stop thinking about what you can't do or what your statutes say you can't do, and instead work on what you can do together as a team. Just finally, a couple of additional things. Other key employment for system strategies that are working very well: solidifying an upfront agreement where people are really committing across systems in very strategic ways. I call them agreements with teeth. So you can't really talk about what you're going to do with each other until you get your checkbooks out and you start saying, well, okay, I'll pay for this and you're going to pay for that and we're going to provide this together. And when that starts happening, really magical outcomes start to take shape. Again, it's an enormous time of opportunity out there. And I would challenge all of us, whether we're advocates, whether we're professionals in the field, providers, government leaders, to really use this opportunity that we have before us to shape history, to shape what we want, where we want things to be in the future. When my daughter and her friends become adults, I want them to talk about us silly adults. because I want them to live in a society where they've kind of figured it out. The systems are working together. They are aligned towards a common vision of what individuals with disabilities can and should be doing as full participants in our communities. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Serena, and thank you, Allison. Allison has laid out a context, giving us a historical perspective, taking us through the passage of the ADA, and then this most important Supreme Court decision, Olmstead, and where are we going in the future? It's not just about housing. It's not just about movement of people from segregated settings to more community participation. As Serena has taken us, it's also about where people spend their day. And for people of working age, it's about an expectation about work and what supports might be necessary. Over these 25 years, we've really seen multiple funding streams, public funding streams across healthcare, employment, vocational rehabilitation, education, transportation kind of coming together. But we know we've got a long way to go, and Serena has really shared with us that the big news at a state level, which permeates down to communities and ultimately touches people with disabilities and their families, what we're seeing is people recognizing that we've got to work together. We've got to elevate expectations. That was what the ADA was all about. And we're really seeing with this Employment First movement not only changes in policy, but how do you operationalize that? How do you make it real? How do you engage employers, the service delivery system and systems to all work together so that people have new choices to have self-directed, self-determined lives? That takes us to really one of the most fascinating and most important issues of the day. And it will take us to our third speaker, Jonathan Martinez, to talk about this really evolutionary and almost revolutionary concept that people with disabilities have a say, more than we ever thought of before, building on ADA, building on Olmstead, really are able to make choices and make decisions, hopefully as we support them, informed decisions about all aspects of their lives. So let me turn next to Jonathan Martinez.
Thank you, Michael. It is such an honor to be here to talk about my favorite law, the Americans with Disabilities Act. And it's so fitting, like Serena said, that we're having this conversation in July and that the anniversary of the ADA is in July, because July is a month for celebration. Think about what we celebrate in July. On July 4th, we celebrate the anniversary of America and the Declaration of Independence, which said in crystal clear language that we all are equal, that we all have certain rights, the rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. It's taken us a very long time to get around to making sure that everyone has those rights. And in 1990, the U.S. Congress and President Bush came around to say that people with disabilities are people. They are people with the same rights and the same opportunities and the same responsibilities. So with that as a backdrop, I have a question for y'all. What's your favorite right? I know, you just heard from these two incredible experts, and I'm giving you ACLU pickup lines. I am very sorry for that, but I want you to work with me for 1 second. Think about it. What are the rights that resonate the most with you, that make you who you are, that make you value who you are and where you live? Freedom of speech, freedom of religion, community integration, caffeinated drinks after lunch? What is it that makes us who we are? What do all of these rights have in common? Choice. Our rights mean we have choices. The right to speech is the right to decide, to choose what to say and who to say it to. The right to association is the right to choose who we spend our time with. Community integration is the right to choose where we live, and if you're a heathen, you can choose decaf. Our rights mean we have choices, and our choices make us who we are. Every choice we make, good choices, bad choices, proper choices, mistakes, and yes, mistakes. Our mistakes make us who we are. Our choices define us, like these two authors said. We are our choices. The purpose of life is to choose. Clinically, that's called self-determination. It's a fancy word just for saying that we have the right to make choices. When we have self-determination, we have control over our lives. We are acting rather than being acted upon. We are doing rather than having things done to us. And what we've known for decades is that when you have more self-determination, particularly people with disabilities, when they have the opportunity to have more control and make more choices, they have better lives. These are studies from people with much more initials after their name than I have. They find that people who have more self-determination are better employed, they make more money, they're more integrated into their communities, they are healthier, they are safer because they have more life control. I mean, think about it. Allison said this really well, as did Serena. What is community integration? What makes us a part of our communities? It's our opportunity to choose what to do every day. If all we're doing is going from one institution to, say, an apartment where we have no say over what to do, have we become integrated into our communities? But if we can choose where to work and what to do and who to see, then we are part of our communities. We are truly integrated into our communities. And yet that's the opposite of what we've been doing for 2,000 years. Because for 2,000 years, people with disabilities have had their opportunity for self-determination taken away. The second someone has shown a limitation in decision-making or in abilities, they are placed under the control of someone else. 2,000 years ago in the Roman Empire, they would put the feeble-minded under a curator. In feudal England, they would separate people with disabilities into idiots and lunatics and put them under committees to make decisions for them. Here in the United States, we have guardianship, where we take someone's rights, some or all of them, and give them to someone else to exercise. And the vast majority of guardianships in this country are what are called plenary or full, where all rights are given to another person. Think about that for 1 second. Another person gets all your rights to make all your choices, makes choices for you, instead of you, and not with you, not in association with you, but for you, instead of you. Your rights go to that other person, making you what one law professor I know calls an unperson, who suffers a civil death because you cannot interact with society unless someone else says so. And we've known for years also that that's a problem. Almost 30 years ago, the chairperson of the House Select Committee on Aging found this, that the typical person under guardianship has less rights than the typical felon. A person in jail can exercise more determination than a person under guardianship. A person under guardianship has someone else saying where you're going to live, where you're going to work, whether you are going to get health care, and sometimes even whether you're going to die. Which has led to study after study saying this, that people under guardianship, specifically ones that are overbroad or unnecessary, experience negative impacts on their life. They have significant negative impacts. They are less healthy, less safe, less employed, less integrated into their community. And think for a second for me. I want everyone to do an exercise with me, okay? I want y'all to think about 1995. Think about where you were, what you were doing. Some of you were in grade school. I hate you. Everyone else, think about 1995. Think about what it was like for people with disabilities. It was 5 years after the ADA was passed, 4 years before Olmsted. So as Allison said, it was still typical to put people in institutions. The height of technology was sitting by your dial-up modem waiting for the magic words, "You've got mail." 20 years later, think about where we are. We have Medicaid waivers. We have more supports and services to enable more people with disabilities to be more independent than ever before. So answer a question for me. Why have the number of people under guardianship tripled since 1995? The estimated number of people under guardianship has gone from 500,000 to 1.5 million in these last 20 years. We have lost a generation. Why? Why has that happened? Well, I'll tell you why I think. It's because guardianship's always been seen as a kindness. It's been seen as protective, so that we can protect people from making mistakes. If people had the right to make choices, people with disabilities, they might make a bad choice. They might do the wrong thing. They might meet the wrong person, sign the wrong paper, might meet someone they shouldn't meet, right? Well, let me see a show of hands here. Everyone on the web, please play along. Show of hands. Who here has closed on a mortgage? You've put hundreds of thousands of dollars and years of your lives in the hands of a bank. You went to a closing ceremony, you got a stack of paper this high, you had to sign all those papers. Did y'all read all those papers? You didn't, did you? That was a bad decision. Where's your guardian? Who here has consented to a medical procedure like surgery? Okay, you put your life in the hands of strangers. You met doctors and nurses and anesthesiologists and surgeons, and you signed a stack of papers this high. Y'all read those papers? It's a bad decision. Where's your guardian? Who here's bought a pasta maker at 2 a.m? It's a bad decision. But we make bad decisions, and we learn from them. Who here has made a bad decision, made a mistake, and gotten better because of it? Who here's dated the wrong person and knows what a good relationship is? Who here's bought a really bad car and learned not to do that again? You grew. You became better, stronger, smarter because you made a mistake. Because you exercised your right to make choices, you became who you are. So I'm not here to tell you that guardianship is never needed. There are times when it may be needed. What I'm here to tell you is that guardianship is never needed just because you are a person with a disability, because you are an older person, because that's the way it's always been, because your IQ is X and for your own good. For your own good? Who here has heard the phrase, relax, it's for your own good, and been terrified? It's right before you get the shot, right? So that is not what we do. We don't make those assumptions because those lead to the unwarranted assumptions Serena and Allison talked about. The ones that assume people with disabilities cannot make their own choices, that they lack capacity to make their own choices. I want y'all to think about your own capacity. Do you make all of your own decisions on your own in a vacuum? Or do you get help? When you have to make a decision about medical care, when the doctor says to you, ma'am, you've got a subluxation in your cervical brachial area, and we can treat that conservatively with Rice method and the anti-inflammatory regimen, or we can do a surgical intervention. And you say, huh? English, please? Or when you go to the mechanic and the mechanic says that your headlight fluid is a quart low and your muffler barrels are ratting around a lot, it'll be $1,000 to fix, and you say, pardon? You get information, don't you? You do some research. You talk to your friends. You ask your friend who knows about cars. You say, Jeff, he's told me my muffler bearings are rattling and my headlight fluid is low. What do I do? And Jeff goes, get another mechanic. There's no such thing as muffler bearings or headlight fluid. You've gotten help. You're smart. You're judicious. You have admitted you don't know something and found someone who does. You exercised your right to get information. Smart, wise. Unless you're a person with a disability. If you're a person with a disability and say, I need a little bit of help, what does society assume? You say, I can't do something, society says you can't do anything, and they take away your right to do everything. Why? Because they do the same thing that you do, because they ask for help like you do. Only people with disabilities are held to the Mr. Spock standard. They're only telling you, unless you make every decision logically, you can't make any decision. Why do we do that? Well, I'm here to propose another way forward called supported decision making. It's a big phrase, a lot of words up on that screen, and we have to put labels on jars. So supported decision making is this. It is a process where people with disabilities utilize trusted friends, family members, and professionals to help them understand the situations they face and the choices they must make so they can make their own decisions without the need for a guardian. That is a lot of words for exactly what you and I do every day. You guys used supported decision-making probably today. I know I did in picking out this tie and figuring out how to get from Fredericksburg to here without getting stuck in traffic. We all do supported decision-making. We all get the help we need. We all get advice and support from people we trust. And people with disabilities can do the same thing. Older folks can do the same thing. And here's what the studies suggest. And studies are being done every day through our National Resource Center for Supported Decision-Making. But the studies suggest that people who use supported decision-making do, in fact, have greater control over their lives. And what do we know from decades of studies? That when people with disabilities have greater control over their lives, they have better lives. They are better employed, better integrated. They are safer. And maybe that's why the National Guardianship Association, who work with guardians, who write the code of ethics for guardians, who do trainings for guardians, who are made up of guardians, say that before you implement a guardianship, before you think about it, before you consider it, try something else. Try supported decision making, try an alternative so that we enhance people's rights, that we give them the opportunity to build on their strengths rather than be beaten down by their limitations. Because friends, I tell you, we all have limitations. It's just that if you don't have a disability, you're not judged on them. You're judged on how well you perform, your strengths. You're judged on how well you present. People with disabilities are not. They are judged on their perceived limitations. They are then segregated from society for 2,000 years. Need more proof on what I'm saying? Recently, a study was done called the National Core Indicator Study. I'm doing a webinar tomorrow on the results. But they did what's called an apples-to-apples comparison. States gathered data on people of similar abilities and similar limitations. So that's the first thing you got to realize. This is an apples-to-apples comparison. People with disabilities who have similar IQs and similar diagnoses compared to others with similar IQs and similar diagnoses, with one question. Do you have a guardian or not? On that particular question, they looked at people with guardians and people without guardians and looked at what they do. These people who are similarly situated. You know what they found? The people without guardians were more likely to have a paid job, to live independently, to have friends other than paid staff, to go on dates and socialize in the community, practice the religion of your choice. What is that other than community integration? So I ask you, given that apples-to-apples proof, do we not have a moral obligation to ensure that people with disabilities not only have the rights Allison and Serena talk about, but are able to exercise those rights? Because are your rights worth anything if you are not allowed to exercise them? If there's someone who can say, you will live where I tell you to live, you'll work where I tell you to work, you'll see who I tell you to see. I mean, really, is the life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness worth anything? If the life you live is where someone lets you live, the liberty you exercise is what someone allows you, if the happiness you pursue may not be yours, are those even rights anymore? Well, people ask me, this supported decision-making thing, how's it work? What's the steps? How does it go? 1, 2, 3, 4. I tell them, no. It's not something that comes with directions. It's a paradigm. It's not a process. It can be so many things. What it takes is assuming that people with disabilities have the same rights you do. And it can be anything from an informal arrangement where I talk with a friend, hey, should I get those muffler bearings fixed? To something more formal like a power of attorney or advance directive where I can assign people jobs and duties and help me with certain areas, to really even very formal things like microboards and circles of support that actually have articles of incorporation and sets out the way things are supposed to work. All of them are supported decision making. Here's what supported decision making is. If you got 3 things, you've got supported decision making. First, come to the acknowledgement, realize, understand, believe that everyone has the right to make choices, to govern and direct their lives to the maximum of their abilities. 1. 2, everybody can say to someone, I'd like you to be part of my decision making. I want you to be part of my circle, my network. And I can do that without giving up my right to make choices. And 3, understanding that everybody needs a little bit of help. Just like you all have gotten supports in making your decisions, people with disabilities and older adults also can ask for help. And they can get help in a number of ways, from understanding situations and choices to communicating the choices they make. If you have those 3 things, you've got supported decision making, and opportunities to do that are all around us. Show of hands, who's been to an IEP meeting? Special education. Okay, the latest, greatest thing in special education called the student-led IEP. Student sits at the head of the table, professionals, parents, advocates all around them, working with the student to come up with the best educational plan, to make the best choices, and lay out the best roadmap to go from wherever they are to wherever they're going to be. What does that sound like? Sounds like supported decision-making. Who here has been involved in vocational rehabilitation or individualized plan for employment? Okay? In the IPE, they have a thing called informed choice, where it's on the counselor in the vocational rehabilitation organization to work with the person to help the person develop his or her employment goal and choose the supports and services needed to get to that goal. What does that sound like? It sounds like supported decision making. Who here has worked on medical or Medicaid planning? Person-centered planning. It's in the HCBS regulations as it came out from the federal government. Everyone works with the person to choose where the person wants to live, what the person wants to do, and the people who are going to provide the supports and services the person needs to get there. What does that sound like? That is supported decision making. All of these things give us opportunities to reach the goal that every single person is a part of every single decision in their lives. Understanding that we all need help making decisions, and that older people and people with disabilities may also need help. They may need more help, they may need different help, but help is help. If you can get help, they can get help, and if you can make decisions to the best of your abilities, so can they. And when we reach that day, when we get to the place where we're all in the head space, that people have the right to make choices, then people like Allison and Serena and me, we're not going to be in front of you talking about rights anymore. We're not going to have to talk to you about rights and what the ADA says and regulations and what the federal government is moving toward now. Because we'll be talking to you about choices. We'll be talking to you about simple choices, important choices, the choices that make us who we are, the most basic choices that I started this conversation with. What do I want to do today? Where do I want to live? Where do I want to work? How do I want to order my day from today for the rest of my life? And when that day comes, then we will have fulfilled the promise of the ADA. We will have reached the dream of the Olmstead decision. I invite you to come with us on this journey. Please check out supporteddecisionmaking.org if you have more questions or more information about supported decision making. We have forms and resources. We have research material. We have stories. You can see videos and training. If you're not already tired of hearing my voice, you can hear it more. Most importantly, we have a thing there called Supported Decision Making Interactive. It's a dedicated listserv where you can talk with people around the country who've been in similar situations as you. And you can say, hey, I've tried this, it didn't work. How do you do this? What do you do in this situation? You can respond to people who have questions because we need that. Supported decision making is so very new, and we cannot afford to have it be just another buzzword. This is our chance to make people with disabilities people. Not in their eyes, because they're already people. They already have all the rights everyone else has, but everyone else out there who would segregate them, who would say that you're not people, you don't have the rights everyone else has. This is our chance to say every single person has every single right. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jonathan. And you remind me of the reasons I went to law school, but you also remind me of the reasons I never practiced law. I was always afraid of going to court because I wanted to be a litigator and facing someone like you. And the impossibilities just reverberate in my head. But thank you for your passion and your advocacy and laying out such an articulate set of justifications for, isn't ADA ultimately about community inclusion, of course, but what is community inclusion if someone else is making all the decisions for you? Very, very interesting connection, and we want to explore this more. So this second part of this first webinar, and being streamed to many of you across the country and others of you here with us live in this room, I'm going to have a dialogue with our three panelists and further tease out some about Olmstead, some about ADA and where we are. And also, if you have questions, you can bring them to us online, or I believe you may be also able to bring them forward in this room. So let me start with sort of very basic question is, with the ADA at 25, July 26th, 11 days from today was the 1990, July 26 was when President Bush signed the ADA into law. Well, as now we're at the 25th anniversary, what do you think are the short list of challenges that must still be overcome to improve community participation and inclusion for individuals with disabilities? Maybe I'll start with Serena on that one.
You know, in our work in systems change, it's not for the faint-hearted. It's very complicated, and you start to talk about policies and regs and funding streams, and then you start to think about the person. And I think the greatest challenges that we see, at least at a systems level, are how do we get the bulk of funding and the practice that's being done on the ground focused toward a more community-oriented model. How do we think about getting staff who have been wed to a business model that has them overseeing a group of people on a regular basis in a building all day? How do we help convert that model to giving not just individuals with disabilities, but the staff supporting them, the flexibility and creativity to be out in the community, to be thinking outside the box and in a very individualized way about what supports an individual needs to pursue the type of life that they want to live, whether that be helping them think about they want to join a gym, they want to volunteer, they want to make friends and have some recreational activities. And I think one of the greatest challenges is getting out of this business model that is so intent on group service delivery and a one-size-fits-all approach to helping people spend their day in ways that the vast majority of them don't want to be spending their day. And I really, I'm so humbled by my fellow panelists today, but just going back to what Jonathan is saying about we take for granted as Americans the many choices we get to make every day, whether it's I stop at Starbucks on my way to work or I have lunch with a friend. And the way that we model services in this country for people with disabilities provide and allow no flexibility like that. No decision making in any part of a person's day. And so I think those are the greatest challenges that we still have to face in this.
Allison?
So I'll answer this more from the perspective of where we should be pushing the ADA and Olmsted, because I completely agree with what Serena says. Again, we spent the early part of this week mapping out what do we say our values are and where does our money go, and there's a complete disalignment. So we have a lot of work to do there. I think we've really, really pushed over the last 5 to 8 years thinking about integration from about where you live to really pushing into how you spend your days. And I think many of us are thinking, how can we use the incredible power of the ADA in other contexts? Again, I think we have kids in schools, but we have too many kids who are in self-contained classrooms, who are in separate schools, who don't really get an opportunity to be fully included. And the power of the ADA and Olmsted to push into that context is huge. And I personally think the more we have inclusion and integration younger in life, the more we've set people up for an inclusive adult life. The whole country is really looking at and struggling with kind of the criminal justice system, with police, and every time you open up a paper, there's a lot about intersections around people with disabilities and the criminal justice system. Too much, whether it's in the mental health system or the system for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities, calling 911 is the first and only option. And here in Virginia, I probably many people in this room were involved in really advocating for a young man with autism who got caught up in a criminal justice system because of 911 calls. And so I think really thinking, how can we use the ADA for people who are unnecessarily segregated and improperly in criminal justice system when it's really because they were underserved or didn't get services. I think those are two important places where advocates are trying to push, the federal government is trying to push, and we need to bring the power of the ADA.
Jonathan.
Not surprisingly, I completely agree with Allison and Serena. So I'm going to focus on what's keeping us from getting there, and it's two things: perception and will. The perception of people with disabilities for millennia has been that they are less than people without disabilities, that their lives are worth less, that they can be segregated away, that they cannot do the things everyone else does. Well, that needs to change, first and foremost. We need to get ourselves in a position where we acknowledge that everyone is, in fact, equal. That's the majority of the battle. I get that question all the time. I talk to doctors, I talk to social workers, I talk to teachers. When I talk about supported decision-making and the changes to be made, I generally get at least one person saying, "You're asking us to change the way we've always done things." And I say, "Yep, I am." Because every great advance ever has been the result of changing the way things have always been done. I mean, if someone didn't realize you could put the meat on the fire, we'd all be eating cold food. So it's about changing that perception first and foremost, and then having the will to make sure that it gets changed, to say that we will not settle for less. When I have advocated for changes in policies and procedures and laws, I've been told, well, that's not our way. And once that's not the Virginia way. And I say, well, the Virginia way sucks for people with disabilities. Because we should not have to settle for crumbs. You shouldn't have to be thankful for the crumbs you are offered when you have a right to the loaf. So to those of you who advocate, show me the loaf. Do not settle for crumbs.
Thank you. Let me go to a next question. And whether you're a real attorney, an advocate, or you just like to watch lawyers on television or in the movies, can you envision what the next generation of Olmstead cases would be? What would be the pivotal key issues? And I'll start with Allison. You're a real attorney, so we don't have to pretend.
Well, I think we're seeing a lot of that happening. Serena talked about, and really I was very privileged to be part of some of the thinking, and people should know years and years before lawsuits happen is when the thinking and the planning happens. And the whole paradigm about pushing this into day services is something that, frankly, we've probably had 10 years in the making of thinking about how to do this. I think people think that work maybe is only about sheltered workshops, for example. That is where we all decided to start because it was kind of a clear paradigm that had a narrative that was compelling. But I think that's going to expand to all types of day services, whether we're talking about day habilitation or day treatment, to really push our system, not just about segregated or sub-minimum wage employment, but to look at segregation in day services. We have been looking, and many of us have been brainstorming, you know, for those of us who do special education work, and I know Serena referred to the least restrictive environment and free appropriate public education. Those are really low standards. It's not as strong as the most integrated setting. It's not as strong as equal educational opportunity, which is in ADA. So many of us are looking at how do we apply Olmstead concepts, skip IDEA, and do systemic reform at a school level. And again, I think finally what I mentioned around criminal justice, many of us are thinking this is really becoming kind of a type of segregation and institutionalization when we see people ending up in criminal justice. How do we build ADA and Olmstead cases around that?
I would add, I think just one other thing to add to that is in addition to group day segregated settings, looking at congregate day settings or programs that are supposed to be community-based in nature. And we're seeing this confluence of individuals being put into community day activities that don't really look like a community-based day activity that you or I would function. So these large programs where the individuals are still largely segregated from, if you're in a park having a picnic with everyone that kind of looks like you, and you're not allowed to go to the other part of the park and talk to people who don't have disabilities, or you're not allowed to get your own transportation there, or you're not allowed to go home when you feel like going home. That's not community based. And so I think there's going to be also some discussion at a federal level at some point, at least I hope, about what community-based day activities really should look like with Fidelity.
And Jonathan?
Once again, I completely agree with Allison and Serena. So I'd like to focus on a question. That's, what does it mean to be integrated? What do people need to be integrated? And it should never be a question of whether people should be integrated, but it should be how we integrate them and what the services and supports are that need to be integrated. And I want to raise one very specific example of what I think is an Olmsted issue, even if it doesn't fall under the Olmsted case. What does it matter that you have the right to live in the community or work or have services if you can't get into the store to buy milk? If our communities are not accessible to people with disabilities, they're necessarily excluded from them. So I think one of the biggest challenges we have is communicating the necessity for physical accessibility. That includes sensory accessibility and the benefits that come from it. Real quick question for y'all. What do you think, in your opinion, and this is a very unscientific poll by me, is the most accessible city in America? Las Vegas, Nevada. You know why? They want your money. I have been to Vegas on a few occasions, and there are ramps, there are Braille accessibility, there are opportunities for people because they know that people with disabilities' money is as green as everyone else, and there is a benefit to having everyone in the same community because they can take your money. Why is that not the same at the local Food Lion or at the local shopping center? I'm not singling out Food Lion. That's what's keeping us from being an integrated community, is that there are still these barriers set up that keep us separate. So when we talk about litigation, I never want to forget that most important part of it is that the community is everywhere. And if people are kept out of their community, they can never be integrated.
We know in the findings and purpose statement of the ADA, certainly it focuses on the issues that we've been talking about, particularly around community inclusion, independent living. But it also uses the phrase to advance economic self-sufficiency. And we spend a great deal of time, and the panelists today have talked about employment and pathways to not just any employment, but matching employment to the interests and skills and talents of individuals with disabilities. But it doesn't seem necessarily that what has fallen into the conversation is that employment is truly equal to advancing economic self-sufficiency. We know today that people with disabilities in this country are 2 to 3 to 4 times more likely to be living in poverty. And that hasn't changed in the 25 years of the passage of the ADA. Do you see opportunities to address and tackle this issue of advancing economic self-sufficiency? Allison?
So in addition to being a civil rights lawyer, one of the things that I think is my something I've spent lots of time trying to think about is access to health care. And we've really created a paradigm for people with disabilities where to get access to long-term services and supports, you have to get onto publicly funded healthcare programs, mostly Medicaid. And in many places you do that by getting on through benefit programs like SSI and SSDI, where there's ties to, showing you can't work and limiting your assets. And so one of the biggest barriers, again, we spent a lot of time talking about this as we've been talking about what would it take to really incentivize competitive integrated employment. And what we hear across the board from families, from people with disabilities is, well, I'm really scared about working because not only am I scared about losing these benefits that, what if I lose my job? Will I be able to get on? But how will I access long-term health care? And I think, obviously over the last 8 years in this administration, we've had a lot of conversations about health care. And the Affordable Care Act has been incredibly helpful. We're seeing that roll out. But again, in terms of thinking about long-term services and supports for most people, we still have the Medicaid system there. So I really think the key, I could not agree more, a life on benefits is a life of poverty. The only way out of poverty is employment. And people with disabilities need long-term services and supports. So we need to find a way. We need to expand. We have programs. We have work incentive programs. We have Medicaid buy-in. But they're really complicated. And people are very scared about taking those opportunities. So I think we really need to focus on how do we make working pay and disconnecting that from access to health care and long-term services and supports.
Serena?
I think this goes to a larger conversation outside of just workers with disabilities. I think having access to financial capability strategies, to information about individual budgeting, asset development, credit counseling is something that, frankly, the majority of America is woefully lacking. And I think this is an area where the private sector and employers are stepping up with employees and offering these services as part of their larger compensation and benefit packages. But to Allison's point, if you're not employed and you're not a worker, you're not going to get access to those strategies as they continue to expand in the private sector. I think that it's really critical that when we're developing individual employment plans or person-centered planning strategies or whatever plan you're working on with an individual and their family, that there are very candid conversations from the beginning related to benefits, related to alternative approaches to long-term supports and services, and really thinking through that financial piece. I think it's a critical component of sustained employment over time. And frankly, I don't know how we will ever see the full realization of the aims and principles of the ADA until the federal government revisits the asset and income limitations associated with not just Medicaid, but Social Security and other the benefits that individuals with disabilities desperately need. These were rules that were put in place in the 1930s. They were updated again in the 1960s. And as it relates to individuals with disabilities, besides the Ticket to Work program and the legislation around that in the 1990s, there's been very little modernization or conversation about that. And we need to have that conversation.
And Jonathan?
Michael, at some point, Michael's going to call on me first so I can say something other than I agree. I think one of the key points, obviously everything they said is 100% correct. Employment is the key to a better life, and I'm a huge proponent of vocational rehabilitation and using it properly and making sure that the vocational rehabilitation agencies do what they're supposed to do. But there are other key parts of the equation, and especially looking at it from the self-determination area. Again, I the risk of repeating myself, if you are more self-determined, if you can make more choices, you have a gateway to a better life, including better employment options. Recently, there has come into being a program called ABLE, the Achieving Better Life Experiences Act, which allows for setting up tax-free accounts that don't count against that limitation on income or assets that Serena was just talking about. But more importantly to me, give the holder of the account the power to manage it. So the person is making choices on how to manage his or her money. The person is being more self-determined, and that's part of the puzzle. That's part of the puzzle because the person who's in charge of that, who has the responsibility as well as the right, is also the person who, this evidence suggests, is going to be better able to say, I deserve more. I have these rights to employment, and to insist upon appropriate benefits and services. So on top of everything else they said, there are other options. I think one of the great problems with the disability service system is it sends people off in so many different directions. There are so many spokes. Here is employment, here is healthcare, here is long-term services. Well, I've just added another one. Here is banking. But one of the key parts is going to be finding ways to connect them, to Serena and Allison's point, to make sure that people have access to be able to navigate this system so that they can have the same opportunities and rights that you do.
All right, I'm ready to ask you the question first. Here we go. We've been talking, obviously, about Olmstead, and post the Olmstead Supreme Court decision, there have been many case precedents built off of Olmstead settlement agreements, as Allison and Serena have talked about. I want to really pin you down, Jonathan, in terms of, does Olmstead open the door to challenge the extensive use of guardianship for decision-making and to compel states in their use of all their public funding streams to look at and regularly consider on an individual basis less restrictive options?
I do. In fact, I just had an article published along with Samantha Crane of the Autistic Self-Advocacy Network and Jenny Hatch, who I'm still very honored to call a friend, on the idea that if the Olmstead court said unjustified institutional isolation is discrimination, well then what is more unjustified isolation than taking away a person's rights? Many states have what is called a public guardianship system, where the state funds guardians. They pay guardians. And if a guardian is not appropriately looking out for a person, is taking away a person's rights, is not empowering a person to exercise his or her right to make choices, to me, that guardian is unjustifiably isolating that person. And if the state is funding that, then that is absolutely, in my opinion, an Olmstead violation. I think it's a textbook Olmstead violation.
I'm going to go to Allison, the other attorney, and as much been involved in Olmstead pre and post. So what do you think?
Well, you know, I agree with Jonathan that there's some precedent to this. Jonathan talked about the difference between full guardianship and people getting, just pieces of rights taken away and that being as limited as possible. It's been quite a while. It's probably been about 10 years, but the Bazelon Center was involved in some litigation bringing both constitutional claims and ADA claims against a state system that made presumptions about people's capacity. If you had a psychiatric disability, you automatically lost your right to vote under a guardianship. We pushed. It's one of those where I think we won. Certainly we made our press release sound like we won. The court said, yes, you're right, you have to do limited determinations. It has to be individualized. You cannot make presumptions. Yet I don't know how much Missouri's system really changed. So I think there is some precedent out there, especially when we're talking about fundamental rights. And I think that was really key in what we brought was, there is nothing more fundamental than the right to vote, for example. The right to marry, again, anyone who read the Supreme Court's decision in this term. So I would say I think there's a lot of promise there, whether it's through a lens of the Constitution or the ADA or both. I think there's some real possibilities, especially when you are focusing on things that are legally considered fundamental rights that you really have to have a very high bar to take away.
I'm going to switch to Serena on a different question. And clearly, when we're talking about supported decision-making, fancy term, as Jonathan said, it's really about extending to a person more control of choices in their lives and making informed decision-making. Serena, you're working so much with states, at least 30 states on the Employment First activities that you're involved with teams that involve not just their workforce development system, but VR as a part of that, and education, and Medicaid, and mental health, all those systems. Are you finding in the Employment First work are they touching on this issue of really adding to the capacity building, the decision-making skills of individuals with significant disabilities?
It's a great question. We spend a lot of time talking with states and their various provider networks about the coined term of our informed choice and what that means, and really applying informed choice with fidelity in an employment-first framework. And I think what we've learned in some of our research is that person-centered planning runs the gamut in terms of quality and what people envision as individualized planning or person-centered planning, and how the process looks. As Jonathan stated, supported decision-making runs the gamut, and individuals need different forms. But it makes it difficult then to train the direct support professionals who are implementing planning activities with individuals, with their families, on how to do it in the spirit of the ADA. One thing that we've spent a lot of time on is talking about the fact that informed choice means not only exposing people in experiential ways to their opportunities and not just talking to them conceptually about things, but also presenting as much information as possible up front about the requirements of each opportunity, both the pros and the cons. And that includes the funding or the supports attached to each one. It also, I think, includes the amount of decision making the individual gets should they choose from different places. So we haven't figured this out, but we are developing resources with states in partnership and with some of their provider networks that we're going to be rolling out in the next year to really help systems get ahead of the curve here and to really be thinking about how to apply these, what can appear as fluffy concepts, in really practical ways to help individuals come to decisions. I think Jonathan said something very important about having the ability to choose and make decisions that are going to help people optimize their lives and their potential based on their abilities. And that is a piece I think gets lost in this. Not all choices are equal when it comes to optimizing your independence, making sure you're optimally self-sufficient, optimally engaged in the community, that you've advanced as to your potential socioeconomically. And that piece of it has to be a part of any, I think, supported decision-making or informed choice process. So that's what we're really trying to get into the weeds of right now. And I think we still have a lot of work to go, but the conversation is at least moving forward, and I think that's an important step.
I'm going to send that one to Jonathan too, because you're talking in front of so many different types of groups across the country about expanding choice. And as you described, there isn't a blueprint that this is supported decision making. It's a paradigm shift, not a process you talked about. But are you seeing states or at a community level, could be nonprofit agencies, really turning to whether it's a youth in transition or it's a working age adult with significant disabilities? It's one thing to say, we're going to support you with decision making and build a circle of support around you. And it's another thing to say, we're going to actually try to teach you and build your personal skill set. Do you see that happening?
Kinda. I mean, it's a difficult question to answer because by the time people get to me, they've generally heard no a bunch of times. So it's not happening for them. But on the other hand, I have worked with state agencies and helped them to create this. One of my favorite stories is regarding the DC public school system that for years was recommending to parents when their child turned 18 to seek guardianship. If there was any, and it was actually in a written policy, if there's any concerns about the child's abilities, recommend the parent seeks guardianship, give them the referral to the court. DC Public Schools now We've worked with them, and they've had some great personnel. They're now stressing supported decision-making and self-determination from pre-K. The Director of Transition, Dr. Pamela Downing-Hostin, is publicly said transition begins at age 3. She talks about kindergartners forming their decision-making networks. And think about how important that is. I know it's funny, but I mean, even if you're figuring out milk or juice, if you know you can get support, you're getting in the habit of making choices. You're getting in the habit of having decision-making networks. And if that's part of your process, child, parent, family, then guardianship isn't even a consideration, is it? Because you've already come to the assumption, the conclusion at a young age, that I make my own choices, that I have a network, that it's okay for me to get support. The other side of that coin is vocational rehabilitation, like Serena said, and I just want to throw in a plug for it. When it's done right, vocational rehabilitation has more potential to do more good for more people in more ways than any other program. This is a program that's sole purpose is to maximize a person's ability to work, to get them what they need to prepare for, gain, retain, or progress in employment. So let me ask you a question. If a person had difficulty making choices or had difficulty with organizational skills, would you hire them? Of course not. Would you retain somebody if you hired them and found out they constantly made horrible choices at your office? Of course not. So of course there are programs that can already work in the types of things you were talking about. Programs to help people learn to make better choices, to create networks, to work with employers, to make appropriate accommodations. And we can do that from several different angles.
All right. We're going to be soon running out of time, and I have about 5 questions, so I'm going to make each question just to one of you. And so I'll feel that way we're being responsive to questions that have come in either from in the room or from online. The first one is that, isn't it true that the federal government, in terms of the Olmstead decision, that community-based options or treatment must not be imposed on patients or individuals with disabilities who, quote, do not desire it? I'm going to give that one to Allison.
So I'm really glad that came up, because as we're talking about choice, you know, one big challenge as we've been moving ahead in Olmstead is people kind of plunking language out of Olmstead and saying, well, choice, I have a choice under a civil rights statute, under the ADA, under Olmstead, of segregated settings. So let me actually answer this in a little bit of a framework. What the ADA and Olmstead is about, and the statute is clear, is about addressing discrimination, about providing opportunities for integration for people with disabilities. So what is the obligation of a Title II entity? States have to set up their systems to provide and focus their resources on opportunities for inclusion. The states have to do that. That's their legal obligation. People have a right to inclusive opportunities. People have been talking about, well, does this choice mean that when my state decides to do the rebalancing and the reshifting that we've all been talking about today, to shift from day programs that are segregated or from institutional settings to community settings, I have a right to fight that using Olmstead and the ADA. And the courts have been incredibly clear. You do not have a right to segregation under the ADA and Olmstead. So, you know, I think to answer that question is when you look at the array of services are out there, yes, it's true, people have a choice of what exists in the system, but as states shift their systems to comply and they are shifting to more integrated settings, you can't use the ADA and Olmstead to stop those.
Thank you. This one is going to go to Serena. And we've talked today, we mentioned the Virginia settlement agreement, but this also is going on in other states where justice has negotiated for rebalancing of resources, helping youth as well as adults move into opportunities for more competitive integrated employment. That's all well and good, says this commenter, but there's virtually been no new funding offered to help implement some very specific outcomes that are expected in those settlements. We're going to move 100 people a year into competitive integrated employment. What is and this comes from maybe a policymaker, what are the policymakers supposed to do?
So that's a great question, and I'm also glad that that was asked. To your point, I work with over 30 states right now, and what I see is that states are not tapping into all of the federal resources that are available to them. They are not exhausting all of the federal technical resources available to them and their provider networks during their rebalancing. In fact, I have many states that say to me, we can't absorb anymore. And what that tells me is that there isn't a real focused strategic conversation across systems yet about how to braid resources in a synergistic way, how to coordinate technical assistance efforts, and really how to maximize the potential of the resources coming from the federal government. I would also say that the states have a tremendous responsibility to utilize the federal resources, the same federal resources they've been getting under a segregated model environment, and realigning those. It's not like the DOJ went in and said, you have to do all these things and we're taking all your money away. They're simply saying you need to realign your focus. And that's a different conversation than saying there's no resources. We have seen state legislatures step up to the plate, authorizing legislation, even putting state money and state dollars into investing into provider transformation, into investing into improving access to school to work transition opportunities for youth with disabilities. And so we know it can be done. And I encourage state policymakers in particular to take full advantage of not just the opportunities that we have at ODEP to partner with your colleagues in other states through our national community of practice, but to really educate yourselves on what are other strategies and approaches that states are taking to get ahead of the curve, because there is a lot of progress being done and a lot of innovative ways to take existing resources and apply them to your systems alignment efforts. I think that there's two more things. I think the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act that has unified state planning requirements in for the vocational rehabilitation and workforce development system is an incredible opportunity to realign, revitalize workforce development systems across a state to focus on this population. I also think that the rollout of the home and community-based service final rule from our colleagues at the Centers for Medicaid or Medicare and Medicaid Services last year, again, presents an enormous opportunity to divert and reprioritize millions, hundreds of millions of dollars towards strategies and approaches and effective practices that we know help individuals with the most significant disabilities achieve competitive integrated employment and full engagement in the community.
Thank you, Serena. We did have a commenter who said, when you talk about employment first, are you also including entrepreneurship and self-employment? And the answer to that is yes. So we'll move past that. Final question. Oh, go ahead. But you have 30 seconds or less.
Yes, with fidelity. Absolutely. But this is where supported decision-making becomes really important. It's not about creating a business and then that no one has had a decision in, no one has said they want to work in, and then sending them there and saying that that's their small business. It's about a small business plan that was envisioned with, by, and for the individual at hand. So there are some fidelity issues.
Okay, 10-second answers. We're going to go starting with Allison, coming across. 5 years from now, ADA at 30, what's one thing this country will look like that's different for people with disabilities?
I am very hopeful that we will have made a significant shift and broken through the low employment outcomes that we've had people stuck at for the last 25 years.
Okay, Serena?
I think we'll see more youth with disabilities achieving a competitive integrated employment outcome or having an integrated work-based learning experience upon exiting high school than those that don't.
And Jonathan?
Instead of 1 million people going into guardianship, we're going to find 1 million people making their own choices. We're going to find people getting out of guardianships. We're going to find people saying loud and clear, I have the right to make choices and you can't take that away.
Fantastic. Can I have a round of applause for our panel? I want you to know that this is the first of 3 in a series of celebrations of the 25th anniversary of the ADA. The next 2 parts, on September 24th, Session 2 will focus on the ABLE Act implementation, new choices for families to create pathways to a better quality of life. What does it mean for you? And Session 3 on November 18th, also from 1 to 3 p.m. Eastern Time, untangling the maze of Social Security benefits and work incentives. How do we make it work for the individual? Where are we going in Social Security reform? I hope you have found today informative. I hope at times you have learned things that you didn't know, challenge you in your thinking, and will challenge you in the future in terms of your actions, working at an individual level and at a systems level. Thank you so much. We hope we'll see you again in a few months. Bye-bye.